Oh, what's going on? I need to talk crazy, so I'm gonna keep in line. And by the way, I'm Terrell, Hall of Fame, D-line, TBKC, and all that sweet, beautiful, wonderful shit. The craziest situation I ever seen with a dog, and y'all don't quote me on every aspect because I was an outsider to a lot of this. But somebody said, "What is the craziest overall situation you ever seen with a dog, and how it happened, how it played out?" This situation is strange. It encompasses a lot of things, and some people are gonna be like, "Oh, that bullshit." Look, it was this dog named Masterpiece. A lot of y'all know about Masterpiece, right? Now, Masterpiece actually is line bred Denzel. His mom is Henny. Henny is litter mates to Mandela's mom. And his dad is Vin Diesel, and Vin Diesel is a Denzel son. So it was Denzel daughter, Denzel son. Anyway, this breeding was done by Eddie up at DTN Kennels. And so when he was a puppy off of that litter, it was a cat named Jonathan Rivera. Jonathan Rivera ended up with Masterpiece, And from my understanding, and I'm putting all this together, and hopefully if somebody else can fill in some gaps, then y'all go ahead and fill them in. But Jonathan became notorious in the bully community for other things. But as it went along, what happened is at that time, Jonathan was a big part of the American bully community with the EE, and he had latched on with Dave and them, and he was, he had made a big name for himself. But unfortunately for Jonathan, and I'm not making light of this, me and Jonathan actually were pretty cool, and he never did anything bad to me, so God bless the brother. But he ended up, with a serious drug problem, and with that drug problem, came bad situations. And unfortunately for that brother, those bad situations manifested into him doing some things he probably shouldn't have did. Now, with Masterpiece, as Jonathan's drug problem persisted, it became, those in the American bully community know about it. Masterpiece was actually sold like 5 times. And not so cheap either. These was like, one guy claimed that he had sent Jonathan $25,000. Another guy, a lot of money like that. I can't remember everything of it, but the dog was sold to a bunch of people and never, they never sent the dog to him. So ultimately, Jonathan ended up, from my understanding, that he robbed a bank or a store or something of that nature and ended up with a lot of years. Now, keep in mind, the whole time, Eddie is still due a puppy back off of Masterpiece. So the original paperwork for Masterpiece, is still in Eddie's hands at DTN. Now, also during this time, of course, it was a lot of studs sold off of Masterpiece too. And it was a lot of those studs, sold 5,000 here, 5,000 there. Well, a pretty cool brother at the time named Jason Blue decided to step in, and I know Jason Blue well. Me and him butted heads, but a few times. But he ultimately, I tell you, dude is a cool dude, man. And he got screwed on that deal because a young lady who was connected to Jonathan Rivera had actually called Dave Wilson, yes, that Dave Wilson, and said, Jonathan's locked up and we need to get rid of his dogs and, what's going on. So Dave was like, "Oh, I'll help y'all get some money to help him and this, that, and the other." And he had a couple bitches that was with him. So they run the deal by Jason, and, Jason was supposed to get a few bitches, from my understanding, and the dog. Well, as y'all probably thinking, like, it's a certain situation with this because Eddie still has the paperwork. Well, you know what I'm saying? Jason, being who he is and being cool as hell, Jason like, okay, I can trust that Dave gonna make sure I get the paperwork and whatever. So, they do the deal. Jason gets robbed out of the females that come along with the deal. The dog, from my understanding, Jason kicked out 25 grand, and he was that dude. Now, Jason's name is getting ran through the mud because he doesn't have the paperwork on the dog, And this was before you could do single registration, by the way. And it's all of these people who are owed a stud to the dog, and the dog is not, around like that. Well, not around like that, but he doesn't have the paperwork for the dog. So finally, Jason gets pissed off and checks him, and they give him paperwork because he showed the dog and everything else. The dog becomes a champion. Keep in mind, Eddie still has the paperwork, the original paperwork. So this was the weirdest situation, because when Eddie finally decided to speak on it, Masterpiece had already become an ABKC, I think, champion or grand champion, and was having puppies registered under him and everything, But the rightful owner of the dog was still Eddie, who had not received, and I talked to him personally, so I can speak on that. Eddie didn't want like the hundreds of thousands of dollars that was out there behind this dog. And I'm talking about hundreds of thousands, because just the 5 times that the dog was sold was 6 figures. But then you talk about the crazy amount of studs that was on the dog while Jonathan was doing this thing. It was a lot of money. Jason was catching flack for it, which he didn't deserve, because he was trying to do something legit. And the same thing that happened, same thing that happened, on the flip side with Eddie. He was trying to do the right thing. Dave and them, basically end up keeping the bitch. I think the bitch's name was Boss Bitch, and robbed Jason out of that. Then they were ducking him on the paperwork because they owed him on the bitch too. Finally, he got his paperwork on the dog, and they settled a lot around it. But when you did the whole body count on the dog, the original owner basically ended up getting nothing, because the ABKC put paperwork on the dog, so his paperwork was invalid. Well, not necessarily invalid, but they just went around him being the owner and basically stole the dog from up under his name. Jonathan, in the long run, I guess he made out the best, because he got, probably a couple $100,000 or more out of the dog, and never even gave Eddie what he was supposed to give Eddie. Jason got robbed for the females on the dog, but eventually he got the paperwork. But I had a conversation with him, and I felt bad because people were just stressing him about stuff that was still owed from the previous, situation on all of these studs and this and that and the other. And ultimately, like, we were trying to figure it out. It probably, like I said, it wasn't just a couple hundred. It was probably like closer to 3, that was out there on this one dog, going all the way back to when, going back to a lot of shit, just put it that way. And even some stolen bitches on Dave's end at the end of the day. It was so much that went on with this one dog. And when you think about it, like, let's just sum it up. Dave and Danny Gaddis, they end up with a few free bitches out of the deal. Jason ended up spending 25. He ended up with the dog, but a bunch of unnecessary headaches that he didn't really deserve to have. Jonathan ended up with probably 300, at least 200, but probably $300,000. The guy who produced the dog and set the dog out on his word just to have the dog out there in the streets for him ended up with nothing out of the deal. That to me was the craziest scenario and the most action I seen on one dog getting moved around the bully community ever. And yes, the dog ended up with a championship, which somehow just still, blows my mind at that time, because it wasn't supposed to be any single registrations. That a man who's sitting there holding the paperwork on a dog that he put out on a puppy deal watches this dog become a grand champion, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's all leads back to the owner of the ABKC, who validated the paperwork, got his little cut off of the money, and kept it moving. Strangest shit ever, but that's the Masterpiece story. Those of y'all that know it, it turned out to be a crazy ass situation. And I think, probably a lot of those situations, but that's probably the weirdest situation I've ever seen, as far as a dog exchanging hands and moving around and all the stuff that happened with that one particular dog. But until next time, y'all, God bless. Peace.